Butchers got me a panini maker. I don't like paninis. They got it for me for my birthday. And I tell them, don't buy me anything, because I don't want anything. It's better to give than to receive, and the gifts are stupid, and I can't pretend anymore. Oh, a panini maker, how did you know? I was having trouble making sandwiches, and you saved me. You want to make a panini? Get a frying pan. Put the bread on there. Put stuff in bread. Wait 5 minutes. Turn it over. Wait 5 minutes. Then punch it with your fist. Here's your panini. Because the paninis, they're so squished, you don't know what's in them. There could be vegetables in there.
Good morning. It's Monday, Medal of Honor Monday, August the 21st, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Stuart Varney, My Take, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, CNN, Rules for Retrogrades, Vivek Ramaswamy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Larry Elder, Kari Lake, and Donald Trump presents the Medal of Honor. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
Demand and supply are the opposite extremes of the beam, whence depend the scales of dearness and cheapness. The price is the point of equilibrium where the momentum of the one ceases and that of the other begins. Jean-Baptiste Say. The economic law of supply and demand and how price discovery comes out of these two variables could not possibly be explained more succinctly and eloquently than this. Never static. Prices come where supply and demand meet and immediately move from there as both variables inevitably stay in constant flux.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Forward. We have never been more miserable. Despite historic peace and material prosperity, surveys show happiness has declined steadily in the United States over the past half-century. A loneliness epidemic has overshadowed not just the United States, but the entire Western world, and the problem only stands to get worse, as young people report feeling lonely more often and more intensely than any other age group. Marriage rates have plummeted, as have birth rates, which have now fallen below replacement. Each year, abortion claims the lives of 1 million babies in the United States alone. We can no longer even agree on the definitions of man and woman. Saul Alinsky must be looking up from the afterlife with pride. Alinsky's rules for radicals inspired some of the most prominent progressive politicians in recent history, including former President Barack Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, with whom the authors of those rules exchanged gushing letters. The Progressive Training Manual worked, and the results have been hell. Fitting, since Alinsky dedicated his book in part to Lucifer, quote, the first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, unquote. Can progress breed misery? Chesterton considered progress a useless word, for progress takes for granted an already defined direction. And it is exactly about the direction that we disagree. C.S. Lewis similarly observed, we all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive. Our civilization is dying, spiritually, culturally, and physically of old age. Each year, the problem worsens. The only way forward is back. In the inaugural issue of National Review, William F. Buckley, Jr. defined the conservatives' mission as standing athwart history, yelling, stop, and at a time when no one is inclined to do so. Timothy and David Gordon have more ambitious plans. A conservative might stop at standing, but the retrograde must go further. He cannot content himself with halting the inevitable march of misery-making progress. The retrograde takes a step back, not to relive some dead moment, but to recover something that has been lost. One man's progressive is another man's retrograde, but the categories, whatever you like to call them, are not merely two sides of the same coin. Revering our cultural inheritance requires humility, the beginning of wisdom. Toppling our tradition demands pride, the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins. Where Saul Alinsky enticed his readers to vice, the Gordon brothers encouraged theirs to virtue. President John F. Kennedy explained the difference half a century ago in the words of the socialist playwright George Bernard Shaw. Some see things and say, why? He explained. But I dream things that never were, and I say, why not? Kennedy's brother Robert adopted the line as a slogan for his own presidential campaign. Their other brother Edward quoted it at Robert's funeral, and generations of progressive politicians have parroted the line ever since. What Kennedy failed to mention is the specific origin of the quotation, which appears in Shaw's play Back to Methuselah in the mouth of the serpent, tempting Eve in the Garden of Eden. It is curious how often Satan crops up in the history of so-called progress. Words such as left and right, forward and backward, progress and regress take a political discussion only so far. Eventually, the conversation must come to sin and grace, because, as Cardinal Manning observed, all human conflict is ultimately theological. The only real directions we can go are up to glory or down to perdition. If we hope to survive, we ought to take a step back and work out which way is which. Michael J. Knowles, Los Angeles, California, 20 December 2019.
And that was the foreword to Rules for Retrogrades. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The apostatic crime in totalitaria. Totalitaria makes the thinking man a criminal. For in our mythical country, the citizen can be punished as much for wrong thinking as for wrongdoing. Because the watchful eyes of the secret police are everywhere, the critic of the regime is driven to conspiratorial methods if he wants to have even a safe conversation with those he wants to trust. What we used to call the Nazi gesture was a careful looking around before starting to talk to a friend. The criminal in totalitaria can be an accidental scapegoat used for release of official hostility, and there is often need for a scapegoat. From one day to the next, a citizen can become a hero or a villain, depending on strategic party needs. Nearly all of the mature ideals of mankind are crimes in totalitaria. Freedom and independence, compromise, and objectivity, all of these are treasonable. In totalitaria, there is a new crime, the apostatic crime, which may be described as the obstinate refusal to admit imputed guilt. On the other hand, the hero in totalitaria is the converted sinner, the breast-beating, recanting traitor, the self-denouncing criminal, the informer, and the stool pigeon. The ordinary, law-abiding citizen of totalitaria, far from being a hero, is potentially guilty of hundreds of crimes. He's a criminal if he's stubborn in defense of his own point of view. He is a criminal if he refuses to become confused. He is a criminal if he does not loudly and vigorously participate in all official acts. Reserve, silence, and ideological withdrawal are treasonable. He's a criminal if he doesn't look happy, for then he is guilty of what the Nazis called physiognomic insubordination. He can be a criminal by association or disassociation, by scapegoatism or by projection, by intention or by anticipation. He's a criminal if he refuses to become an informer. He can be tried and found guilty by every conceivable ism, cosmopolitanism, provincialism, deviationism, mechanism, imperialism, nationalism, pacifism, objectivism, subjectivism, chauvinism, equalitarianism, practicalism, idealism. He is guilty every time he is something. The only safe conduct pass for the citizen of totalitaria lies in the complete abdication of his mental integrity.
And that was Apostatic Crime in Totalitaria from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Stuart Varney. All right. There we go. Let's try this again. Okay.
The wildfires to help protect their properties from fire. That request went unanswered for hours, withholding critical aid to islanders. Now, he added that the person in charge of the water access is a climate activist. Republican Congressman Jerry Carl went farther.
If I was the president, I'd be over there getting the guy that took 48 hours to give permission to pump water out of a creek to put a fire out. That's the guy I would be going to see. And I would have been there day one, not a week later.
So anyways, the point of this is about the Maui wildfires. And the main thing to take away from this is that authority and responsibility are commensurate. There's a lot of people today, mainly office holders, that want to act with impunity. That means that they are able to make decisions without having to accept the responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. No, doesn't work that way. If the government wants authority, then it must accept the responsibility. In this particular case, every one of those officials in Hawaii should be punished, not held accountable. Those are weasel words. They should be punished. They should be removed from office. The governor of Hawaii should be recalled immediately. The mayor of Lahaina, Maui, the mayor, all of the government officials involved in this should be recalled immediately. Also, there's a talk about that this fire may have been a problem because of the Hawaiian Electric Company. But again, I'm sure that Hawaiian Electric had to answer to some kind of an authority, governmental authority. Like in California, we have what is it called? It's a utilities board that the governor sets up, and the utilities have to go to that board and ask permission for everything that they do. And I think you're going to find out that the board in Hawaii, when the electric company said, hey, we need to raise rates so that we can maintain our equipment, the board said no. And so this is the problem again, where it is the government that is creating the problems, but they're not accepting responsibility. They're fobbing it off on somebody else or something else, because we come to find out that the governor of Hawaii is now blaming climate change. But that doesn't work, because why hasn't the governor of Hawaii done something about climate change? If you've known about climate change for decades, why haven't you solved it? Why isn't this problem solved yet? Seems like a simple problem to solve, isn't it? You got to hammer these office holders. And that's where the talk show hosts come in, the Republican talk show hosts that never met an office holder they didn't like, never met an office holder whose ass they wouldn't kiss, and they got to stop doing that. Every time they have an office holder on their show, they have to hammer these people and let them know, you want authority, you're going to accept responsibility, whether you like it or not. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit more, Stuart Varney.
But LGBTQ groups say the rights of students come first, and there have been protests about this at the schools. And the Attorney General says, quote, the state is not targeting parental rights. All our lawsuits seek to do is reinstate the same policies these districts found acceptable with little protest for years. But now the issue is before the state's Division on Civil Rights, and the school district's lawyers say it could take several years before there's a final ruling on notifying parents, or not, if that's adopted. They say they're working on other ways to appeal to try and get around this injunction. Stuart?
And so that was about transsexuality, and that there was apparently a court that issued an injunction on a rule by a school board that in New Jersey that was saying that if any child that wants to be transsexual, the parents are going to be notified. So they're going to notify the parents about it. And so a transsexual rights group went ahead and sued, saying that it's going to endanger the transsexuals. All of this is a masquerade for government rights. And this is about social equity. That's what social equity is a code word or code words or code phrase for government rights. This is the government assuming that it has the right to force social equity, its version of social equity on its citizens. And again, we cannot live in a society in which we have dueling rights. It's easy to figure out whose rights prevail because we can read the Constitution. And in the Constitution, we can see that the government has no rights. Therefore, it is the rights of the individual that actually exist. The government has a limited authority, but that authority must give way to individual rights. So understanding, as a true conservative, you got to understand that what's going on here is a push for government rights. And then when they go to court, the court is being asked to do a, quote, balancing test, and it's a balancing test between the cover story is always either compelling interest or, in this case, group rights, the rights of students or the rights of transsexuals, and there is no such thing. There's only individual rights. There's no human rights. There's no animal rights. There's no women's rights because there's no men's rights. There's no black rights because there's no white rights. Just doesn't exist. The rights of the individual, no matter what your race or sex, etc. The other thing is that you need to know is that the true conservative doesn't say transgender. The true conservative says transsexual. Transgender means grammar, has to do with grammar. That's what the word gender is about. Grammar. He, she is grammar. What they're talking about here really is transsexual and transsexuality. The reason that the left doesn't use the word transsexual and wants to switch it to transgender is to make the whole situation sound more innocuous. They're afraid that everybody's going to get in a panic if they say transsexual. But that's the true meaning, or the true word that should be used is transsexual. And the true conservative uses transsexual and not transgender. And the true conservative knows that the words are important because using the wrong word or phrase is using the right or wrong is the difference between winning and losing. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take. What's that thing?
That's the markets on a Monday morning. Now this. George Bush was sharply criticized for his response to Hurricane Katrina. Remember, he did a flyover. His opponent said, he's out of touch and he doesn't care about the people on the ground. Bush 43 took a nasty political hit on that. Today, President Biden says he's going to pay a flying visit to Maui. He's there for just 1 day, 2 weeks after the disaster hit. His late and rather reserved response not going down well. On August the 9th, when the video of the fires had first burst onto TV screens everywhere, the president issued a brief statement offering deepest condolences. On August the 10th, he spoke to veterans in Salt Lake City and said, very briefly, our prayers are with the people of Hawaii. Since then, he said he's looking at it as he rode his bike, and then a brief no comment from the beach. At the very least, he's missed an opportunity to show he's in touch. That no comment was just tone deaf. The images of the president relaxing on the beach while Maui burned did not help his father of the nation image. So today he'll break his vacation in California, which has its own disaster, fly to Maui, and then return to Lake Tahoe to resume his vacation. I think this president is physically exhausted. He's 80 and frail and needs rest. And he's mentally exhausted by the Hunter investigation and the obvious pressure of the job. August has been a painful reminder of the growing problems of Biden's age. His response to the Maui tragedy is one more reason to question his ability to do the job for another 6 years. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
And so this is an issue that I've talked about before. I'll talk about it again, and that is who deserves to be President of the United States in 2024. And that's, again, Donald Trump. And Donald Trump deserves it to have the nomination of the Republican Party and to be the president because he has the experience and because he has made and kept promises. Joe Biden does not deserve to be president of the United States because of his health, primarily. He is frail, as Mr. Varney has just stated, that he is frail and really doesn't look like he's really up to the job at all. So he does not deserve to be president of the United States, and that is the bottom line. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, CNN warns viewers that Donald Trump has a real chance of winning the general election against President Joe Biden.
Trump's lead is even larger. So these are three polls that were out over the last week. Look at these leads for Donald Trump. He's at 62% in the CBS News YouGov poll, 57% in Quinnipiac University, 53% in the Fox News poll. Look at where DeSantis is in all these polls. Look how far back he is. He doesn't crack 20% in any of them. So in Iowa, you have that 20-plus point lead for Donald Trump. That's actually smaller than the lead we see nationally, where we see these leads of 35, 40, near 50 points in this particular case. Of course, the primary is one thing. If Trump wins the primary, can he go on and win the general election? And we've had three polls that have come out over the last week here. And I want you to take a look at how close this race is at this particular point. Granted, the general election is over a year away. The largest lead for Joe Biden is just 3 points within the margin of error. No clear leader. Look at these. 1 point. 1 point. If you go back at where we were at this point 4 years ago, Joe Biden's lead was high single digits to low double digits. This is significantly closer than where we were 4 years ago. So this idea that Donald Trump can't win the general election, I want you to lose that idea. This race is very, very close, and Donald Trump is polling better right now than basically at any point during the entire 2020 cycle.
And that was CNN warning the viewers that former President Trump has a real chance of winning in 2024. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Vivek Ramaswamy.
I believe today we're in the middle of a national identity crisis. Faith, patriotism, hard work, family. These things have disappeared, only to be replaced by new secular religions in American life. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. These are symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning in our country. And I speak to you today as a member of my generation. I'm 38 years old. I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm rooting for victory. Thank you. And I'll tell you what's going on in our generation, right? Millennials. What's going on with the millennials? We are hungry for a cause. We are starved for purpose and meaning and identity. At a time in our national history when the things that used to fill our void, faith, patriotism, belief in God, nation, the things we talked about, when those have disappeared, that leaves a moral vacuum in its wake. And I think that presents our opportunity. I'm not speaking to conservatives. I'm speaking to Americans. That is our opportunity to step up and to fill that void with a vision of what it means to be an American today.
And that was Vivek Ramaswamy. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's incredible to me that President Trump is still the outsized winner in terms of the GOP primary, so much further ahead than anyone else. And yet you told us 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when you joined me here that Georgia was about to indict him. That's exactly how it played out. That is a fourth indictment. And now we're wondering if Arizona is next. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm sure Arizona is next. And just as Stephen Miller laid out, this is a conspiracy, a grand conspiracy by the Democrat Party to use the justice system at the federal level, but also in the states, using these state DAs like in Georgia, Fani Willis, They'll use Arizona's. They're using New York's. And they're using this giant collaboration basically to affect the 2024 election. But, Maria, let me tell you something. Americans are not going to have it. This election is not going to be swayed by indictments against President Trump that are really pure communism in America today. This election is going to be swayed with gas prices, food prices, inflation, and security. Americans want $1.75 gas back like we had in Georgia in November of 2020. Single moms can't afford cereal and bread to make their kids sandwiches as they go back to school because of inflation and food prices. Americans want secure city streets. Americans want a secure border, and Americans don't want to be dragged off into another decades-long foreign war defending another border that's not our own. Americans see through this exactly for what it is. This is an attempt to steal the 2024 election from Donald Trump by trying to put him in jail, and they are overwhelmingly going to elect him in the Republican primary, and I'll argue that he will win the general election.
Well, I mean, these are serious charges, like in Georgia. I mean, do you think he will be able to be heard in a fair trial before the election, or is there a chance he could go to jail?
Well, I don't think he's going to get a fair trial at all. As a matter of fact, I don't think these charges are fair. What Fani Willis is trying to do is exactly what she's guilty of. She's charging him with RICO, racketeering, and conspiracy. In Fulton County, which is a largely Democrat county, he's not going to get a fair trial, and none of this is fair. But that's what Americans see. You see, Americans aren't stupid. And the typical lies in the media and the headlines, like we've seen for years now, are just not sticking anymore. Americans are going to vote with their wallet, and they remember President Trump's 4 years. They remember how great our economy was, and they remember $1.75 gas. I can't say that loudly enough. $1.75 gas, while we hover around $4 a gallon under Joe Biden.
Well, you made the point to me when we spoke a couple of weeks ago. You used to have a construction company before you entered Congress, and just when you're looking at the refrigerant used in our air conditioners, that's just coolant that we need. It's so hot out, we need the coolant for the air conditioners. That 20 pounds of that refrigerant cost $45 back in 2020. What does it cost today?
It is now around $250 today, Maria. And thank you for bringing that up. And I still do own my construction company, although I don't work at it anymore. Building prices are out of control. And the FDA and the government, the EPA, has now changed regulations on that same type of refrigerant, making refrigerant cost so much more to meet the Green New Deal regulations that the Biden administration is forcing on the American people. It also makes electricity bills unaffordable, and it makes your air conditioner push those electricity bills much higher. And that hurts regular working Americans, single moms, and seniors on a fixed income very much.
It's a great point.
And that was Marjorie Taylor Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Larry Elder.
Donald Trump gave us the most secure border we ever had. He also supported school choice. He also did the First Step Act, which allowed about 5,000 mostly black men with long criminal sentences, nonviolent, to have their sentences reduced an average of 70 months per. He pardoned Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion. Even Barack Obama didn't do that. Yeah, he did an extraordinary job for black people.
And that was Larry Elder. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Kari Lake on Sebastian Gorka's show.
I have to get your reaction to the news of the week, what's happening in Georgia. Is this just going to make President Trump stronger, in your opinion? You know him very well. He's a huge fan of yours. Is this going to strengthen him?
I think so. I was just listening to somebody. I was talking... I was just downtown a little bit ago, and I was overhearing people talk and talking to others, and I was hearing a lot of people say, this is just getting ridiculous. And I believe it's going to bring people in and bring them to feel sorry for and feel bad that President Trump is having to endure this, even if they weren't huge fans of President Trump. I believe if you're not a fan of President Trump, frankly, you've been a victim of that fake news media, which has been pushing an 8-year-long smear campaign and to actually tear down and detract from President Trump, because they know that he's the one guy who's going to get in there and truly drain the swamp. But I'm expecting some other shoe to drop, because you hear the latest with Joe Biden and his pseudonym email name, Robert L. Peters. With all of this coming out, I'm expecting something to deflect from the bad news regarding Joe Biden to come out maybe tomorrow or the next day, because every time something bad happens with Biden, they try to throw another indictment at President Trump.
I have to get you.
And that was Kari Lake on Sebastian Gorka's show. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, President Donald Trump awards the Medal of Honor to a Delta Force soldier.
It is now my privilege to present Sergeant Major Thomas Patrick Payne with the Congressional Medal of Honor. I'd like to ask the military aide to come forward and read the citation. Thank you very much.
Attention to orders. The Medal of Honor is awarded to Sergeant First Class Thomas P. Payne, United States Army, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty on October 22, 2015. His heroism and selfless actions were key to liberating 75 hostages during a contested rescue mission that resulted in 20 enemies killed in action. Sergeant First Class Payne's gallantry under fire and uncommon valor are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, the United States Special Operations Command, and the United States Army.
And that was former President Trump awarding Sergeant Major Payne the Congressional Medal of Honor. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.